presentation. I request Dr. Gautam sir and Dr. Satish sir to chair this session.
Am I audible now? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
You're
Yes, sir. Yes,
audible.
sir.
You're audible, sir.
Yeah.
Unmute, Suresh.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And after a feast of stocks yesterday, so we came here for the second session to start with free papers by the postgraduates. So I call upon each and every person one by one, as there is according to the list. Please be restricted your talk to 8 minutes and give time for approximately 2 minutes for the question and answer session, so that we can conclude the session in a sharp time by 9:30. So Mr. Chandu, Dr. Chandu is ready here?
Yes, sir, I'm ready, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. You start sharing your screen and session. First topic, the cancer associated neurological syndromes.
Is the screen visible, sir? So is the screen visible, sir?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes, sir. A very good morning to one and all. I am Dr. Chandu, Senior Resident, Department of Neurology, Ramchandra Medical College and Hospital, Chennai, Porur. And my topic is a cancer-associated neurological disorder. This is an observational study which is studied during the period of November 2018 to May 2019, an 18 months observational study under the guidance of Dr. Shankar, HOD Department of Neurology, Ramchandra Medical College. Introduction. Paraneoplastic neurological syndromes are rare disorders associated with cancer, not caused by direct invasion or metastasis or consequence of treatment. Is an autoimmune in nature. Paraneoplastic neurological syndromes.
Chandu, I am unable to hear your voice. Chandu is audible to everybody? Excuse me.
Audible, Satish, audible.
Audible, sir.
Chandu is audible?
Yes, sir. He
He's
is
audible,
audible,
sir.
sir.
Satish is audible.
Chandu, I am unable to hear your voice.
So can you hear now, sir? Can you hear now, sir? Hello, sir.
He is very much audible.
Hello, sir.
Praveen, he's audible.
He is audible, sir. He is audible for me, sir.
So shall I continue, sir?
1 minute. Let's Satish sir say something.
Praveen. Hello, Praveen.
Sir, sir.
Satish phone చేయండి.
అదే సార్ నేను చెప్తున్నాను సార్.
హలో
సతీష్ వినిపిస్తుంది అతన్ని.
వినిపిస్తుందా?
వాయిస్ వినిపిస్తుంది అది?
సార్ మీ వాయిస్ వినిపిస్తుంది సార్, సతీష్ సార్.
చందు వినిపించట్లేదు.
ఇప్పుడు ఏం ప్రజెంట్ చేయట్లేదు సార్. ఇప్పుడు ప్రజెంట్ చేయట్లేదు సార్. ఆగాడు. మీరు ఒకసారి మళ్ళీ చెక్ చేసుకోండి సార్.
అంటే నేను మళ్ళీ చూస్తున్నాను. నాది అంటే మనోడిది వాయిస్ ఉంది కానీ మనకు వినబట్లేదు. స్క్రీన్ షేర్ చేశాడు, బట్ వాయిస్ వినిపించట్లేదు. స్క్రీన్ వచ్చింది ఇంట్రడక్షన్.
చందు,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
ఇప్పుడు మాట్లాడమ్మా సార్ తోటి ఒకసారి. ఆడిబుల్ సార్. సార్
Sir,
yeah.
now is it audible, sir? Now is it audible, sir?
No. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Shall I continue, sir?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Introduction. Paraneoplastic neurological syndromes are rare disorders associated with cancer and not caused by direct invasion, metastasis, or consequence of treatment. It is autoimmune in nature, and paraneoplastic neurological syndromes often precedes cancer, normally 5 years before the onset of cancer. And onconeural antibodies are seen in only 60% of cases. Incidence of paraneoplastic neurological syndromes is 0.5 to 1% of patients with cancer. Incidence of classical paraneoplastic neurological syndromes is less than 0.01% of patients with cancer. The aim of my study is to study the paraneoplastic neurological syndromes, which is presented to our hospital, Ramachandra Medical College, from November 2018 to May 2019. So we have a diagnostic criteria for paraneoplastic neurological syndromes or a cancer-associated neurological syndrome. It's divided into definitive paraneoplastic syndromes and possible paraneoplastic syndromes. So definitive paraneoplastic syndromes is classical syndrome. What is classical syndrome is actually the classical presentation like limbic encephalitis, or the classical presentation like opsoclonus, myoclonus like picture, or a correct cerebellar ataxic like presentations, or sensory neuronopathy like presentation with diffuse areflexia and pseudoathetosis like presentation. And when cancer within 5 years of onset is considered as a definitive paraneoplastic syndrome. The other category under definitive paraneoplastic syndrome is non-classical syndrome plus onconeural antibody being positive and the cancer within 5 years of onset of disease. And classical, non-classical pattern of definite paraneoplastic syndrome plus well-characterized antibodies with no cancer comes under the third category of definitive paraneoplastic syndromes. So what is possible paraneoplastic syndrome? It is classical syndrome plus no onconeural antibody or no cancer, classical, non-classical plus partially characterized antibody plus no cancer, and non-classical syndrome plus no onconeural antibody plus cancer in 2 years. So the results, we have a total number of 7 cases, and it is divided as the total of 7 cases, males being 3 and females being 4. 42.8% of males and 57.1% of female, having a female predominance. The disease manifestation, peripheral nervous system manifestation and central nervous manifestations are there. A total of peripheral nervous manifestation, we had 4 patients, that is 57.1%, and central nervous system manifestation, a total of 3 patients, under 42%. And type of paraneoplastic syndrome, it is classically seen 4 and non-classical of 3. And onconeural antibodies were done for 4 patients, and of which positive was 3 patients and negative was 1 patient. So the onset of disease, most of the patients presented to our hospital was like a chronic presentation of being 72%, acute and subacute percentage of being 14% of each. So malignancy diagnosed was ovarian malignancy, breast cancer, small cell lung cancer, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and common malignancy being ovarian carcinoma of being 40%. So these are the 7 patients. It is divided into the age categorization, the duration of illness, whether it is an acute, subacute, or a chronic, or a clinical features, the immediate clinical diagnosis, the imaging features, whether PET or CT or other imaging criteria, and antibody for onconeural cells and types of paraneoplastic syndrome, whether it is a definite, probable, or a possible type of a picture. So first patient was a 45-year-old female who presented with a chronic duration of 2 months with a clinical picture of nystagmus, truncal ataxia, gait ataxia, finger nose test, and finger nose test being impaired. A clinical diagnosis of pancerebellar lesion was made, and a patient had an imaging criteria being positive for breast cancer and an antibody, onconeural antibody, being positive for anti-O antibodies, and it comes under the definitive criteria of paraneoplastic syndrome. The next is 65-year-old female. Duration of symptoms was acute of 10 days. Presented with nystagmus, truncal ataxia, gait ataxia, finger nose and finger nose test being impaired on examination. A clinical diagnosis of pancerebellar lesion was made. We've done a CCT abdomen which picked up an ovarian mass, and antibody for anti-O was positive for the patient and comes under definitive paraneoplastic syndrome. The next is 55-year-old female with a chronic presentation of 6 months and presented with the proximal weakness of all columns with heliotrope rash and Gottron's papule. And with the clinical picture, we came to a diagnosis of dermatomyositis, and an USG abdomen, CT abdomen was done, which picked up an ovarian mass, and an antibody came negative. We have sent for anti-TNF gamma antibodies, came to be negative, and definitive paraneoplastic syndrome was made. And the next fourth patient was a 64-year-old male, and we presented with 18 months onset of a distal weakness of lower limb, decreased pain and temperature up to middle of the leg. Reflexes, ankle reflexes were lost and knee was decreased. A clinical diagnosis of chronic sensory motor neuropathy was made. We done a PET imaging which seems to be normal, with antibody being anti-amphiphysine positivity, and it seems to be a type of definite type of paraneoplastic syndrome. Next case, the fifth case, this is a 65-year-old male who's presented with the disease progression 1 year with behavioral and memory disturbances, with clinical picture coming under frontal temporal dementia and rapidly progressive dementia. We have done a PET imaging which picked up a lung lesion and antibody becoming negative, with coming to a possible cause of paraneoplastic syndrome. Next, we had the sixth case, which is 44-year-old male, disease progression of 1 year, and the presentation was paresthesia, weakness of proximal and distal muscles, more of a proximal involvement. A CIDP-like picture was made in a clinical diagnosis, and we investigated for CIDP. We're not able to find the exact cause for this weakness, like a CIDP-like presentation. Done a bone marrow biopsy, which picked up a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and antibody was found to be negative. And since antibody negative seems to be under that category of possible type of paraneoplastic syndrome. The seventh patient was a 44-year-old female, which with a disease duration of 3 months, which has an asymmetrical sensory loss, joint position sense loss in all joints, and diffuse areflexia. A sensory ganglionopathy, like clinical diagnosis was made, a PET being normal and antibody negative, comes under a possible type of paraneoplastic syndrome. So the discussion is, we have compared our studies with other studies. My study, it had a total of 7 cases, and the observation made of nearly 18 months, and age being for all patients greater than 40 years, and female predominance of male of 0.75:1, and chronic presentation was most common with 72%. Peripheral nerve system manifestation was more common than the central nerve system manifestation, and being 57.4%, and onconeural antibody positive. Total of 4 patients were done, of which 3 were positive. That comes under 75%, and classical type of paraneoplastic syndrome between 57.4%. We compared with other studies, Hannigan and Nanam et al., and they had a disease duration of, they have a total of 45 patients, of disease duration being 8 years, the age being more than 40 years. Our study is correlating with age being greater than 40 years. Here, they're having a male predominance of 1.25:1, and chronic presentation being 42.2%. We had a more of chronic presentation, nearly 72%, and peripheral nerve system manifestation was being matched with our study, is being 64% in Hannigan et al., and ours being like 57.4%. And onconeural antibodies, out of 14, they've done 10 out of 14, and 58.8% of onconeural antibodies being positive. And they have a classical type of paraneoplastic fitting only to 48.9%. The next study we compared with Amy M. Chan et al. With a total of 50 patients, and the 10 years duration of study was continued in the study. The median age of being greater being 57 in Amy M. et al., and having a female predominance as our study being 1.8 and male being 1, and chronic presentation being 88%, with the peripheral nervous system manifestation of 68.2%, and onconeural antibody being positive of 13 out of 25 or 52%, and a classical type of paraneoplastic presentation of being 60%. What are the limitations in our study? Is the sample size is being a total of 7 patients, and a short period of study of 18 months from November 2018 to May 2019. And my conclusion is classical paraneoplastic neurological syndromes are seen in 4 cases, while non-classical syndrome in 3 cases. Central nerve system manifestations are seen in 3 cases, and peripheral nerve system manifestations are seen in 4 cases. Onconeural antibody positive seen in 3 out of 4 cases, and most common malignancy is ovarian carcinoma in our study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Chandu. You are completed in 10 minutes actually. Okay, the thing is, I have one patient who is having frontotemporal dementia as presentation.
Yes, sir.
Was it described previously also in any case reports or any specific?
So frontotemporal dementia, like most of the patients being 1 year with rapidly progressive dementia,
Okay.
Rapidly progressive dementia was being reported, but FTD like presentation with behavioral disturbances were not much reported.
What is this?
Chandu,
For that, any antibody described?
Most probably with the rapidly progressive dementias, we have to with the psychiatric disturbances and memory mostly present like a limbic encephalitis, like which are mostly anti-NMDR receptors most common.
Limbic encephalitis presentation is something different than this, no?
Yes, entirely different. They have rapidly dementia with seizure being most common, sir. Seizure and
Sure.
rapidly progressive dementia.
Chandu,
Yes, sir.
Satish,
you-
I have
in
one
your-
question to Chandu.
you have one question?
Yes, sir.
Sir? Yes, sir.
Satish,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask a question with your permission. Chandu,
Yeah, you can go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
you have diagnosed that Satish has asked that limbic encephalitis. How you distinguish from autoimmune encephalitis? What test you have done? How did you rule out autoimmune encephalitis in that case? And the second question, the
Yes, sir.
TADP case, did you do biopsy? And what about MRI in case of that paraneoplastic cerebral degeneration? Who faces your PCD?
Yes,
What
sir.
about MRI findings in that and CADP biopsy? And how you distinguish this limbic encephalitis, which is present as rapidly progressive dementia versus autoimmune encephalitis?
Yes, sir. So, first of all, limbic encephalitis and differentiating from autoimmune encephalitis. Limbic encephalitis in autoimmune encephalitis, they mostly present mostly like rapidly progressive dementias. Along with that, the patient can have
Differences. How did you difference?
mostly
How did you distinguish autoimmune encephalitis?
anti-NMDA receptor antibodies should be positive for autoimmune encephalitis presenting like classical. One of the categories is limbic encephalitis.
Not must, Chandu.
Yes, sir. Mostly subacute onset of presentation will be there in autoimmune encephalitis.
Yeah, that's true. Because the presentation here it is 1 year, no? That is uncommon with
Yes, sir.
that is without treatment.
Yes, sir.
Okay, one is onset. You tell 1, 2, 3, 4 quickly. You will not that time. One is onset to
One is onset, and then the rapidly progressive nature of autoimmune encephalitis, more like presentation with dementia, which is being rapidly progressive, and mostly they have a seizure-like presentation.
both are rapidly progressive.
Yes.
What type of seizures?
Facial seizures are VGKC LG1. Facial dystonic
Dystonic
seizures.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And
What
even
is
GABA A,
your-
GABA B
no,
autoimmune
autoimmune.
encephalitis. GABA A, GABA B autoimmune encephalitis, which is more resistant to treatment with seizures, sir.
Have you done MRI in the patient?
MRI was done. Sir.
MRI.
We were
MRI
not able to pick up any lesions in the temporal or any.
What do you see
T2
in
arteries.
autoimmune encephalitis?
Mostly, we'll be able to pick up some T2 flare hyperintensities over the temporal region, most commonly. But in case of NMDR receptors, we won't be able to much pick up.
You are not
Mostly
presented
common.
MRI in any case. About biopsy in CADP?
So we have violated all basic investigations, sir. MRI.
No, that is not a basic investigation. Biopsy is not a basic investigation.
Biopsy is not a basic investigation, sir. Biopsy
So
was
what
done
about
at the
biopsy
last.
in that case? I'm asking the report of biopsy. In that case, which you diagnosed CADP as a paraneoplastic neurological disorder, I would like to know the biopsy report. Have you done or not?
We have done, sir. We have came to
So what
be
is the
like
report?
Hodgkin's
Is it
lymphoma. sir.
axonal, demyelinating?
It's a NCS was done. It seems to be like demyelinating pattern, sir. Demyelinating pattern.
So with the demyelination, you're suspecting paraneoplastic.
It came to be like biopsy came to be like Hodgkin's lymphoma. Sir.
No,
Biopsy
not
came-
asking bone marrow. I'm asking about peripheral nerve biopsy, not bone marrow biopsy.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay.
Chandu,
Yes, sir.
in your case, it is ovarian carcinoma is most common associated, no?
Association. Yes,
What
sir.
are the rest of the studies show?
Rest of the studies, mostly ovarian carcinomas are common. Most of the pictures are being like cerebellar degeneration with being anti-O positivity, having a ovarian carcinomas being common. Sir.
Okay.
Okay, Dr. Sindhu. Okay, time is getting late. So we'll move on to the next topic by Dr. Bhavani. impact of COVID-19. Are you ready, Bhavani?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Proceed. Please proceed.
Am I
Share
audible,
your.
sir?
Yeah. Good. Go ahead.
Yes. Is it visible, sir, my screen?
Yes, Amma.
Good morning, all the chairpersons and delegates. I'm Dr. Bhavani Madhuliri from Nizam Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad. Today, I'm going to present a paper on impact of COVID-19 on the frequency, spectrum, and outcomes of the Guillain-Barré syndrome, a single-center ambidextrous cohort study. Coming to the introduction, Guillain-Barré syndrome is an acute polyradiculoneuropathy which presents with varied clinical features, including quadriparesis, neck weakness, and bifacial weakness and respiratory involvement. Usually, it is treated successfully with IVIG or plasmapheresis. Recently, several case reports of GBS have been published in connection with COVID-19 infection, which was published in NAGM Journal and Muscle and Nerve Journal, and also Journal of Neurological Sciences. We observed an increased number of GBS cases visiting to the neurology OPD and IPD during the COVID-19 pandemic when compared to the last year. So this study was primarily conducted to see whether COVID pandemic caused the increase in frequency of GBS cases and to study the clinical spectrum of cases presented during this period. The aims and objectives is to find out the demographic, clinical features, management, and outcome of patients with GBS admitted during the COVID pandemic that we took as a 6 months period from March 1st to August 31st, 2020, and compare it with those admitted for the similar duration 1 year before, that is from March 1st to August 31st, 2019. It was conducted in Nizam's Institute of Medical Science, Hyderabad, and the Institutional Review Board of NCC approved the study protocol. It is an ambidextrous observational single center study. We use a specified protocol for data collection involving 2 defined periods in pre-COVID and COVID pandemic. Coming to the study population, all the inclusion criteria, all the patients who satisfy the criteria of NIMS criteria of the GBS were included in the study, and also hospital admission within 4 weeks of onset of weakness was also taken as an inclusion criteria. And all the patients informed consent was taken. Exclusion criteria is a subacute inflammatory demyelinating neuropathy, toxic neuropathies, and vasculitic neuropathies. Data was collected retrospectively from March 1st to August 31st, 2019, and prospectively from March 1st to August 31st regarding demography, antecedent events, neurological symptoms, and signs of GBS at study entry, and disability scores at discharge from hospital and at 3 months. Disability was assessed using MRS scale and also GBS disability scale. Nerve conduction findings and treatment given were recorded for all the patients. Statistical analysis was done using SPSS version 20, and p-values were calculated using proportion test, and p-value of less than 0.05 was taken as significant. Coming to the results, though it is GBS, we know that common age of distribution is younger patients. During pre-COVID time, around 63.8% of the patients were less than 40 years of the age, whereas there is a slight increase in incidence in younger patients of 73.6% of the patients were less than 40 years during the COVID pandemic. These are the other demographics showing the sex distribution. In both the group, in both the periods, males has predominated the picture. And in COVID pandemic, around 93% of the patients did not have any antecedent events prior to the onset of the symptoms like fever, URTI, or gastroenteritis. Coming to the clinical characteristic, the pattern of weakness during COVID pandemic, there is a slight increase in pattern with the only weakness of both the lower limbs when compared to the pre-COVID period, which is statistically significant. Here we can see that the percentage of patients who present with all 4 limb weakness during pre-COVID time was 86%, whereas there is slight decrease to 61% during the COVID pandemic period, which is statistically significant. And also there is increase in frequency of the patient presented with the both lower limb weakness only. And sensory symptoms and autonomic symptoms were not that much significant. And there is increased frequency of patients presented with ataxic symptoms, predominantly sensory ataxia during the pre-COVID time when compared to the COVID pandemic. And coming to the cranial nerve involvement, this is also 47.2% of the patients has a cranial nerve involvement during the pre-COVID period when compared to the 21% of the patients has a cranial nerve involvement in the COVID pandemic period, which is also statistically significant. Here we can see that when compared to the pre-COVID time, during the COVID pandemic, there is a decrease in incidence in facial weakness and bulbar weakness. compared to the pre-COVID period. And during COVID pandemic, around 17.5% of the patients had the preserved reflexes when compared to the only 2.8% of the patients during the pre-COVID time. And also number of patients requiring intubation were also lesser during the COVID pandemic, which is indicated by lesser disability during the COVID pandemic period. Coming to the electrophysiology, axonal variant has seen in majority of the patient during the COVID pandemic, that is 85.97% when compared to the pre-COVID time. And also pure motor picture has predominated the picture during the COVID pandemic when compared to the pre-COVID times. Coming to the disability assessment, the disability score was actually 4 in pre-COVID times. That is 44%, 4% of the patients had more disability indicated by the disability score of 4, which is statistically significant when compared with the COVID pandemic period. And the treatment received was also 83.3% of the patient has received IVIG during the pre-COVID time when compared to the only 50% of the patients received IVIG during the COVID pandemic period. And around 40% of the patients received only symptomatic treatment. And the MRI score at discharge was also on the favorable side during the COVID pandemic period. Around 57.9% of the patients had MRI score of 2 when compared to 38.9% of the patients of score 2 in pre-COVID time. This was the same thing depicted in the pictorial diagram. We can see here during the pre-COVID time, the GBS disability score of 4 is seen in majority of the patients when compared to the COVID pandemic. And the MRI score, which is showing a better outcome in during the COVID pandemic, MRI score of 2 was seen in 33 patients during the COVID pandemic when compared to the 14 patients during the pre-COVID times. And after 3 months follow-up, the GBS disability score is 0 in 59.6% of the patients, and around 60% of the patients are without any symptoms during the post-COVID time, that is which is also statistically significant. Same was depicted in the pictorial diagram here. The GBS disability score of 0 was seen in the 3 months period in around 34% of 34 patients during the post-COVID time. So discussion, the study showed an increased number of GBS cases, around 57 cases versus 36 cases during the pre-COVID time. Most of the patients were young males with predominantly lower limb weakness and less associated cranial nerve palsies and ataxic symptoms. Nerve conduction study showed majority as axonal predominance compared to the pre-COVID period. And most cases during the COVID pandemic were milder in severity as assessed by GBS disability score and MRI score, and less number of patients required the mechanical ventilation. Many cases recovered only with supportive treatment during the COVID pandemic without IVIG and plasma exchange. Also, at 3 months follow-up, more than half of the patients were back to the normal status and healthy when compared to the patients presented during the pre-COVID time. The limitations is a short duration and it is an observational study. And the main point is that COVID-19 antibodies were not tested in this study.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vani. We have also seen the number you are documented. The thing
Satish,
is here,
one question.
yeah, one question. After that you can ask, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, here, but Dr. Bhavani, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm there.
In your study, if I am correct, more number of actors are there, but when
sorry, sir, your voice is breaking.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir, audible, sir.
Yeah. In your case study, more number of axonal variants are there, but when coming to the recovery pattern, it recovered in 3 months. How that compared to the normal GBS with axonal variants, it takes times to recover, you know. But
yes,
you are
sir. Actually, AADP patients recover better. But, sir, basically, the pattern. 1 minute, sir. I'll show the axon. When compared to the pre-COVID period, the amount has increased. But when the COVID pandemic, on the whole, there is sensory motor variant is only 4% of the patient has sensory motor variant. But when we compare the pre-COVID time, there is increase in axonal incidences.
Yeah.
Why they improved early? Sir is asking. Axonal, why they improved early?
Early when
One point is there in your slides. You showed one point. Most of the cases are mild.
Most of the cases were they presented as a mild variant, sir. All patients only
that's
with the lower
otherwise-
limb weakness they have presented.
Yes,
That too, not like
Rajesh, can I
very.
ask a question?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
yeah, you can, sir. Sir, proceed. Please ask.
Hello, sir.
Sir, Dr. Gopi, you're not audible, sir.
Sir, Gopi, sir.
Yeah. Hello, Dr. Gopi is not audible.
Sir, may I ask a question, sir?
Yeah, you go ahead.
These studies show that it is axonal and motor predominant, that is the M1 variant is more predominant in this observational study. Is it correlating with the other studies in the all over the world?
Sir, actually, I mean, there is varied presentations are there, sir. In NEGM, they have published as axonal variant is more common. But in Journal of Neurological Sciences, they have reviewed around 31 cases. In that, they have described AIDP as the most common variant, sir.
Does that mean that the same pattern what the chain that is India and China, where the Amman variant is more predominantly seen, that does holds good for this pandemic also?
Yes, sir. Even, I mean, one more study was also showing as axonal variant as only as a common variant, sir. During a pandemic, during this early pandemic experience, they have published some article, I mean, some case reviews only, sir. Case reports around 31 cases.
Did you do any CSF RT-PCR for these cases? Any one of the case?
Sir, CSF we have done for few patients, sir. I mean, majority of patients did not have much data. That's why we have not included. And
any
RT-PCR
antibody
we have
testing?
not done, sir. That is the main limitation actually.
Any antibodies testing?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
We have collected the samples, but we couldn't do the, I mean, for all the patients, we are not able to do the antibodies testing. That's the limitation of our study, sir.
Okay, Gautam. Next topic.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay,
Thank
Dr. Rao. Yeah. Next, Dr. Fani Kumar, are you ready? Dr. Fani?
Hello, sir. I am ready, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah, you are audible. Start sharing your screen.
Yes, sir. Sir, is it visible, sir?
Yes. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Morning.
I am Dr. Padikumar, neurology resident, SWIMS Tirupati, sir. So I am presenting a case of polyradiculopathy mimicking CADP in case of chronic araldite sniffing. So coming to the introduction, recreational sniffing of araldite, a hydrocarbon, it can be associated with potential neurological complications, including polyneuropathy. However, CADP-like presentation of glue sniffing neuropathy has been rarely reported. Peculiar abnormalities and MRI have been reported, and we have reported a 22-year-old male with a history of chronic glue sniffing who presented with polyradiculopathy mimicking CADP. So the objective of this study is to characterize the polyradiculoneuropathy closely mimicking CADP in case of araldite sniffing, and the material methods being a 22-year-old male who came to our OPD and who was admitted with a long-standing history of recreational sniffing of araldite. He was evaluated for chronic sensory motor symptoms in all the extremities with nerve conduction studies, sural nerve biopsy, and MRI brain. And here is the case report. A 22-year-old male coolie by occupation, he came with complaining of ascending paresthesias, started in the lower limbs, started from the foot up to the lower trunk, initially in the right lower limb, followed by left lower limb for the past 10 months, and associated with progressive weakness of the lower limbs for the past 10 months. Initially, the weakness started in the right lower limb, followed by left. So in the right lower limb, initially started distally, followed by proximal. And the paresthesias, they are present in the upper limbs from the tip of the fingers below the elbow, and it is associated with thinning of the hand muscles for the past 20 days before the admission. So coming to the history of present illness, he was apparently normal 10 months back when he initially observed paresthesias in the lower limbs, initially in the right foot up to the lower trunk, associated with gripping in the chappals with the right foot, and there is slippage of slippers were there with awareness. And later he noticed similar complaints in the left lower limb, and this weakness is associated with over a progressive, it was progressive and it was associated with thinning of the lower limbs, but there are no fasciculations or stiffening of the muscles. So for the past 20 days, he noticed paresthesias in both the upper limbs simultaneously, started from the tip of the fingers to below the elbows, and it was associated with thinning of the hand muscles, that is distal, but no difficulty in raising the arms above the head, and there is mild difficulty in getting up from the supine to sitting position. History of buckling attacks were there, and no cranial nerve or bulbar involvement, no bladder bowel involvement. And this is the picture of the Araldate, which he had sniffed for the past glue sniff, Araldate sniffing for the past 12 years. And coming to general examination, it was no pallor icterus, and it was normal. Vitals are normal. Cardiovascular respiratory system normal. Parabdomen is normal. So coming to the nervous system examination proper, patient is conscious current, speech is normal, extraocular movements they are full, pupils bilateral, normal says reacting to light, but there is mild element facial pulse. Orbicularis oculi weakness was present bilaterally with tongue having mild atrophy, and there are no fasciculations or no tongue deviation. Tone, there is hypotonia in both upper and lower limbs. Coming to the power, neck flexion and extension is good. Truncal weakness was there. And coming to the upper limbs, proximal, it is proximal shoulder, elbow and wrist was 4/5 bilaterally, hand grip is 50% bilaterally. Coming to the lower limbs, both proximal and distal, that is hip, at the level of hip, knee and ankle, it was 1/5 bilaterally. Coming to the reflexes, so it was almost hyporeflexia in the upper limbs with areflexia in the lower limbs, with plantar being mute bilaterally. So coming to the sensory, pinprick and touch, they were normal. Joint position was intact in the upper limbs, and it is lost up to the toes in the lower limbs, and vibration is reduced distal in both upper and lower limbs. Romberg's cerebellum and gait could not be assessed because he could not walk and there was weakness. We had a diagnosis of, it is a case of chronic progressive weakness of upper and lower limbs. Lower limbs more than the upper limbs. In lower limbs, distal and proximal weakness there was that was equally affected. And upper limbs distal weakness was more predominant in the proximal, with bilateral element facial palsy with sensory symptoms, with the history of glue sniffing for the past 12 years. And we thought of toxic polyradiculopathy related to the glue sniffing. And we have investigated with routine investigations, and which was normal. ANA vasculitis profile was negative, and only MI2 being positive. CRP is little bit, CRP is elevated, RA factor is negative, CPK is 64, RFTs and thyroid was normal. And we had imaging of the brain, and the brain T2 image showed bilateral thalamic hypointensities. So as you can see in the picture, and with the diffuse cerebral atrophy. So we have conducted nerve conduction studies on this patient, and it showed symmetrical mixed axonal and demyelinating sensory motor neuropathy. And these are the images. This is the median abductor pollicis brevis, where latencies, they are pronged. Amplitudes, the Cmaps, they are very much reduced. With velocities, they are also reduced less than 75%. So signifying both the demyelinating as well as the axonal pattern. And this is the peroneal, where the latencies, amplitudes and velocity, they are not recordable. And this is the tibial, where latencies, amplitudes and velocities, they are not recordable. And FFs, they are absent from median abductor pollicis brevis. And sensory, they are median, ulnar and sural, they are absent, they are not recordable. And we have done left rural nerve biopsy, which showed neurogenic atrophy, showing both chronic axonal and demyelinating neuropathy, suggestive of immune-mediated neuropathy. We have sent the sample to the NIMHANS, where we got the report. Patient was treated with methylprednisolone and 5 cycles of plasma exchange. And at the time of discharge, he had mild improvement with power initially, which was 1/5 bilaterally, it improved to 2/5 bilaterally, and he had decreased paresthesias. So coming to the conclusion, hydrocarbon, that is including Araldate sniffing, it can present with chronic polyradicular neuropathy that can closely mimic CADP. A careful history of recreational sniffing and presence of thalamic T2 hypointensity, it provides valuable diagnostic clues in this setting. And this is my bibliography. Thank you.
Good presentation. Satish sir.
Hello, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
It was a case report, no?
Yes, sir.
Gautam.
Yes, sir.
I
Hello?
could not appreciate the thalamic hyperintensity. Can I show again? Can you ask me to show again the
Uh,
scan?
Again, show the thalamic hyperintensity.
Sir,
Hypo.
hypointensity, sir.
Hypo, I
Hypointensity.
could not see. If that is there, okay, it's good.
Sir, these
What-
are the
Yeah,
hypointensity.
I am zooming it, but I could not see. Please show.
Sir, can you see the arrow, sir?
The arrow I can see. I'm zooming it also.
Yeah, high point. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes.
Bilaterally, there was thalamic hypointensity, sir.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good
Sir,
work.
is it visible, sir?
Visible,
Yes, yes.
visible, visible.
Yes, yes. Dr. Fani,
Sir,
you are telling is it a polyradicular neuropathy because the axon here the CMAPs are almost not recordable.
Sir, in lower limbs they are not recordable, sir. In the upper limbs we have, in median we have both axonal as well as demeritic battery, sir. Because the conduction velocity there is less than 75% of the normal limit, sir.
With that so much reduction in the CMAPs, distal CMAPs, how can you say whether it is the polyradicals are involved or not?
Sir, one thing, sir, F wave, sir.
FPS, how can you tell?
Yeah. If lower limb, if motor amplitudes are not recordable, how FF is?
FPS come.
Okay.
How do you confirm that whether it is a really neuropathy or polyradicular neuropathy?
Right. And did
Sir,
you do any post improvement nerve conduction studies?
Sir, which one, sir?
After improving, no? Did you repeat the nerve conduction studies?
No, sir. We have not repeated, sir.
Improvement in only one grade.
Only one grade, sir. From 1/5 power to 2/5 at the time of discharge.
Any blood test to say it is hydrocarbon exposure?
Sir, actually, he showed that label, sir, that he had the recreational.
I'm asking any blood test is there due to such the
This is the causative agent.
To
Sir,
detect,
actually, the toxic profile it was not available, sir. Actually, that was not there, sir.
that is there, it is confirmed.
Yes.
if,
Yes.
Oh,
okay, right, funny. Next, we'll go to the next topic.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So next, Dr. Krishna Haskar.
Sir, I'm ready, sir.
good
Yeah.
morning.
Stop
Good
sharing.
morning, sir.
Stop sharing the. Yeah, good. Krishna Haskar, go ahead.
Yes, sir, once. Sir, is it visible, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Krishna. I'm a senior resident in neurology department from MS Ramaiah Medical College, Bangalore. Today, I am going to present a case report. It is a neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder and an adenocarcinoma of ovary. It is a novel association. This NMOSD is a group of inflammatory disease involving the central nervous system and may cause a severe disability. And this paraneoplastic syndrome are remote effects of the cancer caused by autoimmune response that are triggered by tumor cells. In the previous, till now the literature, NMOSD, the most commonly an idiopathic immune condition, it has been described, and following infections of HIV and EBV have been described. And there were only a few cases of NMOSD presenting as a paraneoplastic syndromes that are associated with B-cell neoplasm, carcinoid tumor, lung carcinoma, and esophageal cancer. Herein, we report a case of a 53-year-old lady with a paraneoplastic NMOSD associated with adenocarcinoma of ovary and which improved with IV methylprednisolone and azathioprine. So this is a 53-year-old post-menopausal lady. She presented with a bleeding PV for 2 months and she was diagnosed to have adenocarcinoma of ovary. She was started on paclitaxel and carboplatin chemotherapy and received 4 cycles of chemotherapy. A few months later, she developed multiple episodes of vomiting, and within 24 hours, she developed sudden onset of weakness in both lower limbs, and she was not able to move her both legs, and she had painless urinary retention and with decreased sensation in both legs. On examination, it revealed paraplegia, power is totally 0, and decreased sensation in both lower limbs till the abdomen, and brisk deep tendon reflexes in lower limbs. On investigation, her blood investigations were normal, CBC, liver function, and renal functions were normal, and HIV and syphilis were negative, and vitamin B12 levels were normal. So we got an MRI, we suspected a dorsal myelopathy. We got an MRI brain and MRI spine done. So this MRI spine showed longitudinally extensive transverse myelitis extending from C3 to D12 levels. And this is an axial cut showing the MRI spine showing the demyelination. And this is a post-contrast image. The CSF analysis, cells were 50, glucose is 67, and proteins were elevated. And CB net for TB was negative, and CSF for malignant cells were negative. So we worked up for immune workup was done, which showed ANA IF was negative, AC levels and C ANCA, P ANCA were normal limits. Her aquaporin 4 antibody was positive, and serum MOG was negative. And she was treated with IV methylprednisolone for 5 days, and oral azathioprine was started. And symptomatic improvement was seen, and her power in lower limbs improved, and she was able to stand and walk with support. Coming to the discussion, the clinical manifestations of NMOSD result from immune-mediated attack on aquaporin-rich regions of the brain through an aquaporin 4 and related antibodies. This aquaporin 4 is also located at extra CNS sites such as intestines, endometrium, kidneys, airways, and skeletal muscles. And this aquaporin 4 is also expressed in tumor cells such as carcinoma of the breast, adenocarcinoma of the lung, thymoma, lymphoma, thyroid carcinoma, and carcinoid tumors. These tumor cells express as onconeural antigen proteins that are normally expressed by mature neurons, glia, or muscle. The cancer-directed immune responses initiated by those antigens have the potential to target autoantigens in the nervous system. There are 2 large series, one mentioned in the Archives of Neurology and International Journal of Neurology, that NMO is described as a paraneoplastic phenomena in 31% and 12.2% respectively. In our case, she was treated with IV methylprednisolone course for 5 days and started on azathioprine, and she improved well at the time of the discharge. So conclusion, the longitudinally extensive transverse myelitis with NMO positive has been described as not unusual. In our case, the paraneoplastic myelopathy on the background of CO or CA ovary with NMO positive antibody is very unusual. So, but the paraneoplastic syndrome with aquaporin 4 antibody status has been described, but on the background of CA ovary, to the best of the literature surveyed, this is the second case in India, the first being published by Sachdeva et al. From BJA. And here are our references that we have used.
What are aquaporin sites in the brain?
Sir, aquaporin sites are located in the periependymal region and the brainstem regions, sir. Periventricular region in the ependymal regions, and the
Did you do
diencephalon
VEP in this case?
hypothalamic regions. Sir?
Did you do VEP? Did you do VEP in this case?
No, sir, we couldn't get VEP done because that examination vision was completely normal, sir.
So once vision is normal, we don't do VEP?
No, sir, we do VEP to look for any subclinical involvement.
What is the importance of subclinical involvement in this case?
Sir?
How the visual features differs in MS, NMOSD, and MOG?
Sir, in multiple sclerosis, it is a short segment one, sir. Whereas in case of NMOSD, it is bilateral and more than half of the optic nerve length will be involved and more posterior and chiasm will be involved. Whereas in MOG, predominantly is bilateral, anterior will be involved with perineural enhancement.
You can do VEP also in this case.
Yes, sir. Actually, we tried to get VEP, sir, but during this.
Hello. Sir, can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
Can we consider it is a paraneoplastic entity? Can we consider the paraneoplastic entity?
Sir, paraneoplastic entity has been described, sir, in many case reports, but with aquaporin 4 antibody positive status is that we have to look for these ones. The associations have been described, but on the carcinoma, still now the CA breast and CA lung and carcinoid and esophageal carcinomas have been described, renal cell carcinoma in various case reports, but on the background of the adenocarcinoma ovary, which is histologically proven.
How many days after adenocarcinoma did the neuroculus optica presentation was there?
Sir, approximately 4 to 5 months duration, sir.
Suppose, can we consider in all cases of NMOSD as a paraneoplastic presentation? Suppose if carcinoma features are not there at the presentation of NMOSD, can we relate, or we need to investigate further if the patient, and in what settings we have to consider paraneoplastic situations?
Sir, sir, usually when they doesn't have any primary malignancy, if they present with a typical clinical picture like NMOSD, so when they present elderly, and it is always better to screen for a cancer in an elderly lady, sir, about 40 to 60 years of age.
Okay. So elderly presentations are more important to rule out rather than the NMO presentation in the younger age group.
Yes, sir.
Maybe the
Any atypical between the NMO versus non-paraneoplastic NMO versus non-paraneoplastic NMO?
Yes,
Or
MRI.
Hello, sir. Sir, can you repeat the question, sir? Voice is not clear.
Differences between a NMO of non-paraneoplastic and NMO is paraneoplastic.
Yes, sir. Sir, there is no much difference. The presentations are same, but
different.
non-paraneoplastic will be more involvement of quadriplegics, and with optic eye involvement will be more.
No, the MRI features. Is there any relation by the MRI features? Can we differentiate both the things? MRI findings.
MRI findings will be longitudinal extensive transverse myelitis with quad edema will be more. Edema will be more in case of the NMOSD rather than paraneoplastic.
Okay. Satish sir?
Yeah.
We can go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Venkatesh next. Dr. Venkatesh. Venkatesh is there.
Venkatesh, are you ready?
Hello, Venkatesh.
Yes, sir. I am there, sir.
Yeah. Start your session.
Yes, sir. I'm sharing my screen, sir. Yes. Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes. Start.
Okay, sir. Good morning, everyone. Respected delegates and panelists, thanks for the opportunity. I am Dr. Venkatesh Mitvalli from final year neurology resident from Andhra Medical College. Today I am presenting a typical presentation of pharyngocervical brachial variant of GBS with SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. Coming to the introduction, as we all know that SARS-CoV-2 causing coronavirus 2019 infection has spread globally with an increasing number of reported cases of critical ill patients with neurological complications. And the neurological complications of COVID-19 range from headache and anosmia to encephalopathy, encephalitis, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, seizures, and both hemorrhagic and ischemic strokes, and in the peripheral nervous system, myopathies and myositis and Guillain-Barré syndrome. This PCB variant of GBS is a rare localized variant of GBS. It is approximately 3% of the total GBS cases. And usually the clinical features include the oropharyngeal, neck and arm weakness associated with arm areflexia. Usually the lower limb reflexes, there is no lower limb weakness. Here we are reporting, as far as my knowledge, this is the first case of a typical presentation of PCB variant of GBS in India. One case was reported in the Neurology India in the American Academy of Neurology. Here the case report, 35-year-old woman with no prior history of fever, presented with insidious onset, gradually progressive weakness of cervical, bulbar and bilateral facial. The weakness was progressed for 1 month, but the presentation was late to our department. It came at 2 months, and the duration, 2 months duration, along with the asymmetrical weakness of both upper limbs, that is right more than left, of 1.5 months duration. On neurological examination, the patient was alert and oriented and showed dysphonia, dysphagia, and bilateral LMN facial palsy, weakness of neck flexors, and also asymmetrical weakness of proximal and distal muscles of the upper limb. The right side MRC grading is 2/5 and the left side it is 4/5 with diffuse hypotonia. And the strength is normal in lower limbs. There was diffuse hyporeflexia in all the 4 limbs. Here the NCS showed the absent snaps with decreased motor nerve conduction velocities and increased temporal latencies in both upper and lower limbs. CSF examination shows the albinocytological dissociation, and MRI brain and C-spine are normal. the serum ANA is negative and even the serum ganglioside antibodies are negative. The serum shows the positive SARS-CoV-2 antibodies. The titers are very high, that is 55.25. And here the patient was given the corticosteroids and IV immunoglobulins, and the patient showed mild to moderate improvement. So here the MRI brain and also this MRI cervical spine, which are normal, did not show any significant abnormality. Here the test for the SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 antibody, it is positive and the titers are very high, 55.25. And as I already mentioned, the ganglioside antibodies are negative. Even the ANA and vasculitis profiles are negative. This NCS report shows the complete snaps are absent, and also in the motor nerve conduction velocities, there is a normal CMAP amplitude in the normal CMAP amplitude in the bilateral median nerves, and there is increased latencies and the velocities are decreased, and F waves are absent in the median nerves, and also it is prolonged in the common peroneal nerve. So it is suggestive of the sensory motor demyelinating neuropathy consistent with Guillain-Barré syndrome. Here this patient showing the asymmetrical weakness. There is a gross asymmetry between the right and left limbs. When she presented, the power is almost 1/5. And after the IVIG treatment course of corticosteroids and IVIG, the power was improved to 3/5. So coming to the discussion, GBS associated with COVID-19 infection has been reported in more than 50 cases. It includes AADP, Aman variant, Miller-Fisher variant, polyneuritis cranialis, PCB variant. PCB variant was not reported in India. And almost 50% of all these patients require mechanical ventilation, and 10% of them even died. But although excellent recovery after therapy is reported in many of these cases. So the clinical course in our patient is atypical with asymmetrical upper limb weakness and bulbar involvement, and respond moderate to the corticosteroids and IV immunoglobulins. So in conclusion, our case adds to the literature that rare neurological manifestations are possible during this COVID-19 infection, and PCB variant of GBS seems more severe and rare than other etiologies. But more data is needed to confirm the pathological link between this COVID-19 and GBS, to explain the occurrence of relatively higher percentage of axonal forms, and to clarify the prognosis of these cases. And the pitfalls in our study was, in our case, was the patient came late after the weakness was stabilized. She came late, and also the atypical presentation and more similar case studies or case reports are needed to confirm this COVID-19 pathology to this PCB variant, connection to this PCB variant.
Good presentation.
Thank you, sir.
How did you rule out myasthenia in this patient, Venkatesh?
Sir, sorry to mention, sir, in this patient already RNS was also done, sir.
Yeah, that you
RNS
have to mention. RNS is negative.
Yes, sir. RNS was negative, sir.
One more question, Venkatesh.
Yes, sir.
Does that 2 months delay is there, no, from the presentation to the
Yes, sir.
your seeing the
Yes,
case?
yes, sir. Presentation to the hospital, yes, sir. She came after 2 months duration.
In between, she can catch up a COVID infection, no?
So you have done code test.
You done COVID antibodies?
Yes, sir. We have done the antibodies, sir, but we did not done the RT-PCR, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. And in between the after the onset and before going to the hospital, she might develop the infection, no?
Infection, yes, sir.
Venkatesh, what specific anti-ganglioside antibodies have you done for PCB variant?
Sir, PCB variant GT have shown, sir, GT1A. It was
Anti-GT1A antibodies.
Yes, sir.
What type of virus? COVID virus? What type of virus?
Sir?
What type of virus? COVID virus?
Sir, RNA virus, sir.
Single strand or double strand?
Single strand RNA virus, sir.
What are the proteins?
Sir?
What type of proteins you get in COVID-19, in coronavirus?
Spike.
Your membrane protein, like that, you get some proteins. Just to let you know how far you read the microbiology of coronavirus.
Spike protein.
Yes, spike protein, envelope protein, membrane protein. Okay.
Okay, Venkatesh.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right, Venkatesh.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Gautam, we can go next.
Yes, sir. We can go, sir, next.
Yeah. Vishal, next.
Thank
Are
you.
you ready?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm ready.
Yeah. Please start.
One second, sir.
One request, I request all the presenters to complete on time because we are running 10 minutes late. We should be able
Yeah.
to start the oration by 9:30.
Sir, is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, yes. Be
Sir, I'm
brief.
Dr. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Vishal. I'm final year neurology resident from Nizam's Institute. Today, my presentation is PET findings in autoimmune encephalitis. Autoimmune encephalitis is increasingly recognized as a potential treatable cause of encephalitic syndrome. PET scan is used in these patients to look for metabolic changes and to detect any occult primary malignant focus as well as to consider paraneoplastic conditions. These findings are variable with different types of autoimmune encephalitis. This is the consensus criteria in 2016 for autoimmune possible encephalitis. All three should be there. That is subacute presentation within less than 3 months of working memory deficits and altered mental status or psychiatric symptoms. And at least one of the following has to be there, like new focal findings of focal CNS findings, seizures not explained by previous seizure disorder, CSF pleocytosis, and MRI features of encephalitis. And we should exclude all other causes. Aim of this study was to study the frequency and range of PET abnormalities in seropositive and seronegative autoimmune encephalitis and to correlate serological antibodies, CSF inflammatory, EEG features, and MRI findings, and to find out paraneoplastic type in a whole body PET scan. Study design was observational, retrospective, and prospective case series. Is carried out in Nizam's Institute Medical Science and Neurology Department. Duration of study was 2 years and sample size was 30 patients. Here we retrospectively reviewed and collected prospectively the case records of autoimmune encephalitis patients admitted in neurology department between 2018 and 20. Autoimmune encephalitis was diagnosed on the basis of clinical history, examination, investigation, and exclusion of other causes. Investigation included MRI, PET, CSF analysis, EEG, serological studies, and malignancy workup, apart from the routine blood chemistries. We followed these patients prospectively at regular intervals. Inclusion criteria: all patients aged more than 5 years with suspected encephalitis fulfilling the consensus criteria for definition of autoimmune encephalitis. Those who are not giving consent and proven TB or bacterial meningoencephalitis and known case of cerebral metastasis and proven metabolic causes of encephalitis are excluded. Statistical analysis: categorical variable are presented as number and percentage, while numerical variables are presented as mean, median, and as appropriate. And data was also represented using appropriate diagrams, bar diagram like pie diagram. Data was represented as numbers and mean as appropriate. Coming to results, the 30 of autoimmune encephalitis patients were identified. Females were 16, males were 14. Sex ratio being 0.9:1. Mean age was ranging from 6 to 72 years and 35 years. 19 patients had seizures as the predominant manifestation. 12 had movement disorders. 11 has behavioral abnormalities. This is the male to female sex distribution, and seizures are the main predominant signs. Later being followed by involuntary movements and abnormal behavior changes. Out of the 30 patients, 13 were seropositive and 17 were seronegative. And AMPA was positive in 3, TPO antibodies were positive in 5, and 1 in GAD positive, and remaining are NMDA positive in 5 patients. And MRI was abnormal in 11 patients and normal in 19 patients. Greater than 2 areas of hyperintensities are noted in MRI and 11 patients, and majority of these are temporal and parietal hyperintensities. Coming to PET findings, cortex being most involved, followed by brainstem and thalamus and basal ganglia coming in the next order. Both hypermetabolism and hypometabolism have been noted, but hypo is the most common as compared to other studies and observed in 19 of the 30 patients, hyper in 17 patients, and both combination in 4 patients. This is a case. He is a 60 years male patient present with subacute onset within 1.5 months. He presented with short-term memory loss with behavioral changes, and we have excluded other causes. And CSF analysis of normal cells with increased protein. This patient showed a medial temporal hyperintensity on left side in MRI, and we have done PET where it showed bilateral left more than right medial temporal hypermetabolism. This is another case, a 52-year male presented with fever followed by behavioral disturbance in 1 month. On examination, there were no deficit except for language disturbance, and MRI showed bilateral temporal orbitofrontal thalamic hyperintensities. CSF showed increased protein with normal glucose and nil cells. His PET scan showed temporal temporal right more than left, and temporal hypometabolism, and also parental hypometabolism. So a major limitation of this study is that is retrospective, and it included all the patients meeting the criteria who underwent PET at a single tertiary center, leading to some selection bias. The sample size being small, and not all patients underwent CSF antibodies testing, which may be more sensitive. So we may underestimate the number of seropositive patients. However, there is no difference between brain region metabolism between the seropositive and seronegative groups. Future prospective studies may further clarify the role of PET in diagnosis and monitoring autoimmune encephalitis in general and specific antibody syndrome in particular. Conclusion: PET was abnormal more than MRI in autoimmune encephalitis, with brain cortex region hypometabolism being the most frequently observed. And most importantly, in seronegative autoimmune encephalitis with unremarkable MRI, FDG PET showed typical findings of autoimmune encephalitis, and it can be kept as an early biomarker for earlier treatment and improved outcome. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Vishal. What is the sensitivity and specificity of PET in AI? Hello. Yeah, Vishal?
Sir.
Yeah. Sensitivity and specificity of PET in autoimmune encephalitis?
Sir, it can be used as early biomarker, but when we have to correlate with clinically with other findings, sir. I'm getting disturbance.
Yeah, if PET negative also features of autoimmune encephalitis, no?
Hello? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. And how specificity, how we have to, in what situation we have to proceed?
Sir, if this predominantly if they are seronegative and MRI are inconclusive, but clinical criteria is going more favor with autoimmune encephalitis, PET can add an information so that treatment cannot be delayed, and we can.
So can we?
Sir, I'm getting very much distance.
Yeah. Please unmute. Is that?
Vishal?
Sir.
Sir was asking about the sensitivity and specificity of the test.
Sir, and means
it gives in percentage. No, sensitivity and specificity will be given in percentage. Okay, no problem.
So why the all patients not underwent CSF antibody test?
Sir, CSF antibody was not done in all, sir. Only few patients we have done. Because the cost being high and delay in treatment waiting for the antibodies.
Did you take institutional ethics committee approval for this?
Yes, sir. Yes,
then
sir.
There is no question of cost coming in the way. You are presenting the paper. You would have done on your own.
Okay.
Sir, we didn't wait for.
Okay. So PET will be more useful in paraneoplastic autoimmune rather than paraneoplastic or cancer-associated autoimmune versus non-cancer associated autoimmune encephalitis?
Yes, sir. And to rule out paraneoplastic, PET will be very helpful in like intracellular network.
It will be more useful in this cancer-associated IAE versus non-cancer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, right. Okay. So next, Dr. Satish. Dr. Satish is ready here?
Yes, sir. I'm ready, sir.
Yeah,
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Satish.
Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes.
Good morning, sir. I am Dr. Satish, final year senior resident, Department of Neurology, SIMS Tirupati. My study was a prospective open label study of clinical profile and outcome of patients with acute ischemic stroke receiving intravenous thrombolysis, both alteplase or tenecteplase. Acute ischemic stroke is the leading cause of morbidity and mortality worldwide and is responsible for 3 million deaths in developing countries. IV thrombolysis and more specifically mechanical thrombectomy in large vessel occlusions will favorably influence the outcome in acute stroke patients. Here we discuss the clinical characteristics of stroke patients who underwent IV thrombolysis with a focus on window period, door to needle time, and the complications associated with thrombolysis, post-thrombolysis, and primary outcome was measured at by NIH's at admission and discharge, the comparison between NIHS score, and the secondary outcome was comparison of MRS at admission time and then 3 months of follow-up. Study design is a prospective open label study, and study population was 1.5 years from 2019 to the October 2020, and regulatory approvals has been taken from the SWIMS ethics committee, and also written informed consent has been obtained from all study participants. Inclusion criteria: patient presenting with window period of 4.5 hours was included in inclusion criteria. Exclusion criteria: major intracranial hemorrhage or subarachnoid hemorrhage and coagulopathy INR more than 1.57 were excluded, and other standard contraindication of IV thrombolysis like neurosurgery, spine surgery, brain surgery, or other malignancy or GI surgeries are also excluded. And the data analysis, clinical and demographic characteristics were analyzed: window period, O2 needle time, NIHS score, and MRS score, and complications post thrombolysis were measured. And the primary outcome was difference in NIHS score at admission and discharge, and analyzed using student t-test. And secondary outcome was change in MRS score at 3 months when compared to the initial MRS score admission, and p were less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. Results: these are the clinical characteristic of patient cohort, and the mean age of presentation was 56.2 years, and the male outnumbered the females, and 55 are male and 19 are females. Risk factors: hypertension, diabetic are the major risk factors found in this study, followed by alcoholism and cardiac diseases constituting around 25% of cases. TOST classification: major artery occlusion, large artery occlusion was seen in 54 patients, cardioembolic in 13 patients, small vessel in 20, and other causes like 5 or 6 plus other determined etiologies. Stroke territory: anterior circulation involved in 73% of cases, posterior circulation 10%, and Lachner syndrome in 16% of cases. NHS at admission, more number of patients, around 67% are presented with moderate stroke at 5 to 15 NIHS score, and moderate to severe, around 10% of cases are present in moderate to severe stroke. And the average window period measured was 164.85 minutes, and the interquartile range was 117 to 240, and the average door to needle time was mean 74 minutes, and the drug administered was altiplase in 29 patients and tenecteplase in 45 patients. And the complication symptomatic ICH was seen in one patient, that is his NIHS score was changed was 4, NIHS score was increased by 4. Asymptomatic ICH was seen in 5 patients, and decompressive craniectomy, 2 patients went for decompression, and 5 patients expired due to 2 patients are due to the anaphylactic reaction to the tenecteplase, and 1 for post thrombolysis, and remaining 2 patients in the follow-up they expired due to secondary infections, and mean duration of hospital stay was 9.6 days. Here the NIHS score comparison at admission and discharge: more number of patients, around 40 patients were present in 5 to 10 NIHS score, but at the time of discharge, NIHS score was 31 patients presented had a MRS score of less than 5 at the time of discharge. So this was the difference between NIHS score difference admission and discharge, whereas MRS comparison at admission 3 months follow-up. At admission, more patients were dependent or wheelchair bound, having MRS score of 3 or 4. Around 44 patients were presented with MRS of 3 or 4, whereas at the 3 months follow-up, patients were 65 patients, 60 patients were presented with MRS of 0, 1, or 2 with functional independence. And primary outcome, NIHS score decrease, favorable outcome was NIHS score decreased by 4 at the time of admission and discharge. 38 patients showed favorable outcome, and 32 patients showed unfavorable outcome with statistical significant p-value. Whereas difference between the NIHS score at admission and discharge between altiplase and tenecteplase, 17 patients out of 29 showed favorable outcome in altiplase group, whereas 20 patients out of 45 showed a favorable outcome in tenecteplase group, but it is not statistically significant between altiplase and tenecteplase group. The secondary outcome, improvement MRS score from admission to 3 months, 47 patients showed favorable outcome, 27 patients showed unfavorable outcome. That is functional independent, and the p-value was statistically significant. And the secondary outcome between Altiplase and Tenecteplase, 20 patients showed favorable outcome and 27 patients Tenecteplase showed favorable outcome. But there is no statistically significant between Altiplase and Tenecteplase group in terms of secondary outcome. Discussion, real life clinical scenario of stroke thrombolysis in a resource poor setting for mechanical thrombectomy revealed statistically significant favorable outcome for primary and secondary outcome in cases who underwent IV thrombolysis. No difference in primary outcome between Altiplase and Tenecteplase group. No difference in secondary outcome between Altiplase and Tenecteplase group. This was a comparison with other studies. Our present study sample size was 74 and the average window period was 164 minutes. And other studies showed around 130 to 190 window period. And the door to needle time at our institute was 74 minutes when compared to the other studies like Indian studies like 66 minutes and 78 minutes in Padmavi et al. And 90 minutes in other studies. And primary outcome was 54% improvement was there in NHS score, that is primary outcome in our study, whereas a few other studies were 65%. And second outcome was seen around 64%, that is MRS improvement, whereas other studies 72 and 74% improvement was seen in a few other studies. These are my other references.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Satish. Why more Altiplase patients are there in your is because of free availability or something more easily administrable drug, or why you have more Altiplase than Tenecteplase rather than Altiplase?
Sir, cost factor, sir. Altiplase and Tenecteplase cost factor.
Okay.
And patient main thing was the cost factor only, sir. When we counseled for IV thrombolysis, when we give for two options, Altiplase, Tenecteplase.
Okay.
Cost we explained them, but they opted for more Tenecteplase.
Okay.
Are you thrombolizing for NHS less than 4 also?
Yes, sir. Because two patients who is a TTD employees presented with right hand weakness, hand grip weakness, because of his occupational limitation due to this stroke, we thrombolized two patients, sir. Only right hand weakness. So NHS score less than 4 also we thrombolized, sir.
Latest criteria, latest guidelines says. Any latest guidelines? What are the latest guidelines saying about NHS 4, less than 4?
Yes, sir. We can thrombolyze in minor stroke patients also, sir. If it is functional disabling the patient, if that deficit, neurological deficit.
Okay. Right. Dr. Gopi sir, any question? Okay, Dr. Satish. Okay, this is good study. Right. So next we'll go, because of time limitation, can we go for the next topic?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Harita, are you ready?
Yes, sir, I'm ready.
Yeah. Please start.
Can you see my screen, sir?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Harita from NIMS. I'm going to present about long-term outcome and efficacy of immunosuppression in aquaporin 4 positive neuromyelitis optica spectrum disorder, a single center study from South India. Introduction: NMO was first described by Devick and Gault at the end of 19th century. The presence of aquaporin 4 antibodies in serum was first discovered by Dr. Lennon and colleagues. The morbidity due to disease is attack-related in NMOSD. Hence, it is important to treat the acute attacks and prevent secondary attacks in NMOSD with long-term immunosuppression. Aims and objectives. Our main objective is to study the long-term effect of immunosuppression on disease course in patients suffering from aquaporin NMOSD by quantifying the EDS score of the patients at the time of initial presentation and during the subsequent follow-up, by calculating the annualized relapse rates to know the effectiveness of long-term immunosuppression on the outcome of the disease, and to compare the effectiveness of various immunosuppressive drugs by calculating the differences in ARR before and after treatment, and also by calculating the time to first relapse of the individual immunosuppressive agent. The study period was 2 years and it is retrospective observational study. Institutional ethics committee approval was taken. Inclusion criteria include all patients who are fitting into the criteria of NMOSD according to 2015 criteria of International Panel for NMO Diagnosis and who are aquaporin 4 positive. Patients fitting into above criteria who were on minimum of 2 years of follow-up on long-term immunosuppressive agents like methotrexate, azathioprine, MMF, and rituximab. Exclusion criteria: patients who did not complete 2 years of treatment with steroid-sparing immunosuppressive agents due to any reasons like drug-related adverse effects, non-compliance with the medications, financial constraints, and secondary infections. Patients who had not given consent to the study, patients with proven other CNS inflammatory or demyelinating disorders like MS or sarcoidosis. Statistical analysis: categorical variables were presented as numbers and percentages, while numerical or continuous variables were presented as mean or median. For the assessment of normal distribution, Shapiro-Wilk test was used. Comparative analysis for normal distributed continuous independent variables was done using one-way ANOVA test, and for dependent variables using sample paired t-test. Pre and post treatment ARS were calculated using Wilcoxon signed rank test. EDSS at the onset of the disease and at last follow-up were compared using paired sample t-test. Statistical analysis was done using SPSS version 23. The total number of patients were 52, and out of which females were predominant, 46, and the ratio is 8:1. Male to female ratio was maintained across all the age groups, and no males were present beyond 40 years of age. Mean ARR of males is more than that of females. Coming to demographic data, the mean age of the study population is 31 years, and females were predominant. Duration of the disease is 60 months. The onset of disease to the start of long-term immunosuppression is 6 months. The number of attacks prior to the diagnosis of NMOSD were 2. Type of attacks: more number of patients had transverse myelitis, about 36%, optic neuritis in 21%, area prostoма syndrome in 11%, cerebral syndrome in 5%. In the combination, majority of the patients had transverse myelitis plus optic neuritis, and they are of 38%. The EDSS at last follow-up, majority of the patients had EDSS of 1.5 to 5.5. The median number of attacks were 3. The number of patients who took azathioprine were 16, MMF were 11, rituximab were 10, methotrexate it is 1. The time to first relapse, there were no relapses after second year in MMF and also in rituximab treatment treated patients. Whereas we can see there are more number of relapses in the azathioprine group. Pre and post treatment ARRs, the pre-treatment ARR of azathioprine is 2, post treatment is 0.16. For MMF, pre is 2, post is 0. For rituximab, pre is 1, post is 0. Methotrexate, pre is 0.67, post treatment ARR is 0.36. The EDSS at the onset and at follow-up: azathioprine EDSS at the onset of disease is 6.25. At last follow-up, it is 4. For MMF, at the onset of disease, it is 6. At last follow-up, it is 3. Rituximab, it is 5.5, and at last follow-up, it is 3. Methotrexate, at the onset of disease, it is 4, and at last follow-up, it is 3. And all these are statistically significant. The change in treatment causes include majority of the cases are due to drug-related adverse effects. And next, financial constraints. One patient was shifted from MMF to azathioprine because of pregnancy. Complications: according to long-term drug treatment, majority of the complications were seen with azathioprine group, and they include hepatitis and leukopenias. In mycophenolate mofetil group, diarrhea was seen. In rituximab, apart from UTIs, no other adverse effects were seen. Discussion: time to first relapse in azathioprine group was more in the first year. It is about 29%. Azathioprine failure was seen in 52% of the patients, which is similar to several other studies on azathioprine like Mealy et al. And Elson et al. 53% of the patients on MMF has no relapses, and 18% relapses in the first and second year, and 11% in third year. The failure rate in our study is slightly higher compared to other studies like Husay et al. And had failure rate, which had a failure rate of about 40%. There were no relapses in the rituximab group, which is better than many studies, which had failure rate of varying from 0 to 40%. On methotrexate group, 25% relapsed in the first year, second year, and third year, and none relapsed in 25% of the patients. This is very less compared. This is less compared to the other study by Kitley et al. The pre and post treatment analyzed relapse rate decreased significantly with all the three drugs. This is similar to other studies. Median EDSS in azathioprine pre and post treatment group decreased from 6.25 to 3.74, and in all other groups, this is similar to study by Jeong et al. On comparison of three drugs, the probability of being relapse-free is higher with rituximab group followed by azathioprine and then MMF, with a significant p-value of 0.018. All the previous studies showed that rituximab is superior to all the others with fewer relapse rates. Conclusion: females were more in our group. No males were present in older age group. Most presentation was that of transverse myelitis. Early diagnosis and treatment initiation is necessary for lesser disability. ARR and EDSS significantly decreased with azathioprine, MMF, and rituximab. Probability of being relapse-free is higher with rituximab, which is followed by azathioprine and then by MMF. Drug-related adverse effects were high with azathioprine, with more probability of drug withdrawal. I thank all my professors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Haritha. It's a good study actually. So one good fact is rituximab. Actually, antibodies are more prone for relapse when they stop. All autoimmune diseases are more prevalent when once you stop, more frequent rather than in the preceding the drug. But in your study, rituximab is more useful than other drugs. So
Yes,
how many doses of rituximab you have given?
11 patients, sir.
I don't know. How many? 2 doses? How many doses you have given?
We have given every 6 months, sir.
6 months. Okay.
Yes,
So at the end of that 2 years period, that means you have given 4 doses.
yes, sir.
2 year.
Yes, sir.
So how many days after the last dose you have followed those patients? Last dose of the drug, and how many days follow up after that last dose?
Patients are still in follow-up, sir. Few patients are still in follow-up. They have been taking rituximab.
Okay.
They'll be coming to us for every 6 months.
Okay. So sustained effect we need to see actually.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's a good. Okay. Gautam?
Yes, sir.
Can we go because time is...
Yes, sir. We can go.
Thank you, Dr. Haritha. So next, Dr. Hemant. Dr. Hemant is ready here?
Ready, sir.
Hemant?
Sir.
You're not audible, Hemant?
Hemant?
Sir. Am I audible, sir?
For me, you are audible. For Satish, sir?
Yeah. Yes.
Sir.
Hemant?
Shall I start, sir?
Yeah, you can.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Hemant from GJ Guntur. I'm going to present 2 case series. It is about adolescent or adult onset leukodystrophy due to methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency, treatable cause. Coming to introduction, methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency has an autosomal recessive inheritance pattern and is the most common inherited disorder of folate metabolism. Methylene tetrahydrofolate catalyzes the NADPH dependent reduction of 5,10-methylene tetrahydrofolate to 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, which in turn is required for the conversion of homocysteine to methionine, which is required for the formation of phospholipid of neuron. Methionine help in formation of myelin sheath. In the absence of methionine, there is myelin degradation. Biochemically, there are elevated plasma homocysteine, homocystinuria, and low methionine levels. 5-10-methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency is a genetic disorder that can occur at any age and can be easily detected by increased homocystinemia. In adult onset forms, the clinical picture is often complex with association of various neurological features and thrombosis. Adult onset MTHFR deficiency may manifest with a combination of progressive spastic paraparesis and polyneuropathy, variable behavioral changes, cognitive impairment, psychosis, and seizures. Brain atrophy and white matter disease are present in almost all cases. So we present 2 cases of leukodystrophy presenting as paraparesis. Case 1 is of a 17-year-old male born out of consanguineous parentage, was brought with complaints of difficulty in walking from 10 years of age. He had difficulty in the form of stiffness of both lower limbs, associated with difficulty in wearing chappals, difficulty in getting up and down the stairs, difficulty in getting up from squatting position. There is no history of weakness of upper limbs, no history of cranial nerve or bowel and bladder involvement or sensory symptoms, had a history of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. On examination, his cranial nerves are intact, spasticity of both lower limbs with power of 3/5 in lower limbs and 5/5 in upper limbs, with exaggerated deep tendon reflexes, bilateral Babinski and spastic gait. And all routine blood investigations are normal. MRI scan of spine is normal. CSF fluid analysis is normal. An MRI brain showed T2 and FLAIR hyperintensities in bilateral symmetrical frontal and parietal regions, such as leukodystrophy. And as he got a CSVT, we sent for serum homocysteine levels. They are elevated. And we sent for a genetic profile for leukodystrophy, which came positive for MTHFR deficiency. Is the picture of the patient showing T2 and FLAIR hyperintensities in frontal and parietal white matter areas, which is suggestive of leukodystrophy. And his MRI spine was normal. And his homocysteine levels are more than 50. This is the genetic report showing homocystinuria due to methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency. The second case, a 20-year male patient born out of consanguineous parentage, presenting with complaints of weakness of both lower limbs since 1 month, without bowel and bladder involvement, without sensory symptoms, without cranial nerve and upper limb weakness, and normal cognition without any family history. Examinations, there is spasticity of both lower limbs with exaggerated reflexes and ankle clonus with bilateral Babinski. And all the routine blood investigations are normal. MRI spine was normal, NCS is normal, and CSF fluid analysis is normal. MR brain showed similar like the last case, like symmetrical white matter hyperintensities in bilateral deep periventricular and frontoparental white matter, suggestion of leukodystrophy, and his serum homocysteine levels was also elevated, and the genetic profile came positive for homocystinuria due to methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency. Is the MRI picture of this second case showing the hyperintensities in frontoparietal white matters. Is the genetic profile report showing homocystinuria due to methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency of autosomal recessive pattern. So both the patients were treated with betine, tablet betine, tablet homine, and given supportive therapy, and they are symptomatically improved. So come to conclusion, since methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase deficiency is a potential treatable disease, early diagnosis is crucial, and betine treatment should be started as early as possible. So it is therefore imperative for clinicians to be aware of the clinical patterns of early and late onset forms of the disease, and one should consider this treatable condition of spastic paraplegia. Thank you.
Okay, that was a nice presentation. Thank you.
Okay.
I think we can conclude the session now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, we can conclude the session.
I thank all the presenters, and then thank everyone for giving me this opportunity.